We'll get started up. It's not late, but I think well worth the wait. Appreciate your coming tonight to be part of the Higganum Vision Group's community program on what we call the DOT building, but it's the Scovil Hoe Manufacturing Complex right next door. My name is Lynn Cooper, and I am currently the president of HVG. A little louder. I brought Diane's speaking system. Hi, Kim. Quiet, but she's stealthy. I am Lynn Cooper, president of Higganum Vision Group, and want to welcome you here tonight. HVG was conceptualized in 2008, founded by Liz Bazazzi, who is somewhere. And thanks to Liz's efforts, we've made huge progress to date. We were established to support the thoughtful development of the existing village center while preserving our town's natural and cultural assets. We have, between 2009 and 2012, held visioning sessions. Many of you participated to find out what the collective vision is for our community. And using input from this, we have developed a vision for our group, which is a vibrant center, enriched by natural resources and a strong sense of community. And I think all of you can agree that would be quite a thing to have here in the center of Higganum. And the mission of Higganum Vision Group is to empower the community to achieve its vision for Higganum. This is not what we want. We're merely here to help find out what you want and help figure out how to make it happen. To that end, we've hosted many of these educational meetings over the past year or two, including information on the Higganum Cove. We talked a little bit about comprehensive community planning, charrettes, trails, and a multitude of other subjects. And as you know, tonight we're here to hear about the opportunities for the Scovil Hoe location right next door. The state has announced that it's leaving. And tonight we'll hear a little bit about the historical significance of this location, some of the environmental considerations, Connecticut's initiatives that exist today to support preservation of historic industrial locations, and some architectural opportunities. The structure tonight will be a discussion from each of our panel members here, and followed by Q&A and some open discussion. Following the evening, we do have a questionnaire we would ask you to fill out just to get down some of your ideas and some feedback on some ideas that have been shared with us up to this point in time. Tonight, our town planner, Liz Glidden, has graciously agreed to be the moderator, and I'll ask her to introduce our speakers and get the program going. Great.
Thank you, Lynn. Great to see such a wonderful turnout and so much community interest in this historic gem that we have just behind us. So far we know that in all likelihood DOT is going to be moving out of that building in the fall of 2014, making it potentially available to the town in some capacity, maybe as early as January or February of 2015. So tonight we're here to talk about some of the opportunities and some of the constraints in redeveloping that site, some possibilities for what the community would like to see there. We have an excellent panel here. I'd like to introduce Amy Valancourt here to my right, who's a licensed environmental professional and a Brownsfield specialist. She works with Ty and Bond and has been there. She brings 16 years of experience in Brownsfield redevelopment and has worked in many of the towns here in Middlesex County, so she has a great local background that's going to assist us. Right here to my left, we have Wes Haynes from the Connecticut Historic Trust. Wes is a circuit writer with the Trust and project director of Making Places. Prior to coming to Connecticut, Wes worked with the New Jersey Trust and the Preservation League of New York. of New York State. He's also the executive director of Stanford's nonprofit Historic Neighborhood Preservation Program. Patrick Pinnell here is an architect, planner, author, and educator. He lives here in Higganum. Patrick has worked on a number of national projects, including the preservation of Fenway Park, the planning efforts following Katrina down in New Orleans, and the Goodspeed Actors Housing over in East Haddam, which many of you have probably seen as you cross the bridge. Patrick was the former head of the Yale School of Architecture, the Architecture Graduate Program, and we're very pleased to have him here tonight. And last but not least, we have Elizabeth Malloy, our very own executive director of the Haddam Historic Society. She has been the director of the Society since 2002 and has a degree in Preservation and American Studies. Again, the aim of the Haddam Historic Society is to promote and preserve the local history for future generations. So on that note, I'm going to start with Elizabeth, who's going to give us a little bit of history. We're going to maybe the panelists are going to part to the side to make sure that everybody can see what's being projected here on the screen.
Why is it transparent? Can't do it without pictures.
Bravo.
All right, well, thank you, Liz, for that introduction. I'm going to start with just a little history of Scovil Hoe and of this particular site. But before I do that, I'm going to shamelessly plug our annual meeting on May 15th, where Professor Seth Brockman from Brown will be coming to talk about Scovil Hoe and its relationship to southern cotton plantations and how they really benefited from the South being their biggest client and that relationship to slavery. So I encourage everyone to come out on May 15th at the Haddam Volunteer Fire Department, the new one in Higganum. So let me start with a little history of Scovil Hoe. D&H Scovil Company was founded in 1844 by two brothers, Daniel and Hezekiah Scovil Jr. Their father, Hezekiah Scovil Sr., had worked for Eli Whitney and manufactured guns and gun barrels for the U.S. government. And I'm just going to show you, this is actually an original sign from the Scovil Hoe company. Probably hung up on the building on the Scovil Road. The next slide. And these are some examples of Scovil Hoes that we have in our collections at the Historical Society. If you've never seen one. I think everyone in Haddam either owns one or has found one. So this is the Scovil homestead. We have a modern picture and a historic picture. And this is where the Scovil boys were raised and where they learned their trade in ironworking. Daniel Scovil, one of the brothers, had spent some time in the South as a young man observing cotton plantations and how they worked. At that time, most hoes were made in Europe, specifically England. And he thought that he could develop a better hoe and convinced his brother, Hezekiah Jr., to go into business with him. And they were one of the first in the nation to actually manufacture hoes using water-powered machinery. And their planter's hoe became the actual standard for the industry. Next slide. The Scovils sold most of their hoes, as I said, to southern cotton plantations. And along with Cutaway Harrow, also known as Higganum Manufacturing, was one of Higganum's largest employers throughout most of the 19th and early 20th centuries. During the Civil War, they made ramrods for the U.S. government, and between 1868 and 1895, Scovil Hoe prospered and expanded throughout the village. The market for hoes was eventually moved to Africa and South America for coffee plantations. 200 men were actually employed by Scovil Hoe in the early 20th century, around 1914. And later reports indicate that they made entrenching tools and handles for turret laths during the First World War. Between World War I and World War II, the firm transitioned from drawing hoes under hammers and welding to drawing hose on one piece from strip steel with presses. This reduced the labor that was required, power and floor space also, and they started to sell off their properties in town. During World War II, they did make submarine joints and cutters for Remington arms. The Scovil family sold the company in 1947, but the firm continued to manufacture hose in town for the next 2 decades. By the early 1980s, the manufacturing of hose had ceased locally, but a few of the buildings were used as office space and storage space. Now I'm going to talk about the buildings just for a second. The buildings you see here were all located along Candlewood Hill Brook, so all up and down the valley here, which is known as Hoe Valley. And the building that you see at the upper left-hand side corner is the office building. The building down on the right here on the top is Mill Number 1, and that was located the farthest out Candlewood Hill Road. And that was built sometime between 1849 and it was enlarged later in 1855. Now Mill 2, which is on the bottom left, which is now currently occupied by the Apostles of the Sacred Heart. That was built between 1859 and 1860. And then Mill 3, down here in the corner, is actually what is now home to the Higganum Laboratories. And that was built in 1867 and then later enlarged. Next. And these are just some more things from our collection showing Scovil Hoe catalogs as well as some stationery letterhead. Next. Now we're going to stop here for a second. This map is from approximately 1879, and this is where we're going to start talking about this particular site. And what you see circled up there is where basically we are now and where the 2 large, long brick buildings are ultimately built. This was called Mill Site Number 4. And it was originally the site of a sawmill, and then later a feldspar mill built around 1866. This 1879 map shows the Hall, Spar, and Quartz Mill. And shortly right after this, the Scovils bought this property. So next. Now this is a very early photograph of that quartz mill that was located basically more or less right where we're standing. Maybe a little bit outside in the parking lot here. Next. Now here's the 1881 bird's eye view map of Higganum. And again, that building that you just saw in the photograph there is the one that is circled. Now by this time, Scovil had taken over the property, but the brick buildings had not been built yet. It was right after this that the first southernmost building was erected in the very early 1880s. And according to newspaper reports, it was 260 feet long and 40 feet wide. Next. And this just shows the Scovil buildings around 1881. So let's go to the next picture. And here we have the southernmost building that was built in the early 1880s. And if you look closely, you can see in the left-hand corner that that wood building that we'd seen in the previous photographs and drawings is still attached to the long brick building. And they kept it that way for many, many years. So as I said, for many years, the older wood-framed feldspar mill stood to the south. And I'm not 100% sure when it was removed, but the next slide is going to show us some factory workers in front of one of the brick mills. And the Scovils are very smart. They used brick for most of their, or if not most, if all their mill buildings. Unlike Cutaway Harrow, which built all of their mill buildings out of wood, and they had a devastating fire in 1914, and Cutaway Harrow was basically burnt to the ground. And the Scovils never had that problem. Next slide. And this is an interesting picture taken, I'm not sure what we call that hill.
Swan?
No, not Swan.
No, that's the
It's not from
Dyke.
Swan, it's up,
Higganum Dyke.
yeah, from Higganum Dyke. It's taken from up there, and you can see in the circle there, the new brick building to the left, and then the old wooden building to the right with the smokestack dividing the two. It's not clear to me, this picture was taken after 1895 because you can see Higganum Union School there, and that's when that building was built. It's not clear to me in this photograph if the second mill out here is standing. And this is a Sanborn map from 1915, which does show the second building has been erected by this point. The historic wooden, which was originally the Feldspar Mill, is shown here in yellow. So clearly, wooden buildings are shown in yellow, brick buildings are shown in pink. Oh, Patrick's flashing. Okay. Except that I can't get it to so this is from 1915, and it shows the old historic building there, and then the two very long buildings, which are what we're going to be discussing this evening. They sort of arbitrarily gave roads names in those days. I don't know why this one was called Wausau Road. I don't think it ever was. And then this was called Forge Road, I think primarily after the fact that that's what, more or less what they were doing here. And it shows the school building here. So this Sanborn map is from 1915. According to some research, an addition was added to the west elevation of the newer building over here around 1945 when the state took control of the property and converted it to a state garage. Next. This is a photograph from the 1950s during a Memorial Day parade, but you can see the buildings in the background here. And by this point, the Feldspar Mill, the wooden part, has been taken down. So sometime between 1915 and 1950. Next. And this is pretty much how the buildings exist today as a state garage. You can tell that a lot of the overhead large doors were put in when it was converted to a state garage. Next. And then these are some recent pictures of a tour that we had there a few years ago. Next. And just some close-up showing the construction of the building. Brick. Next. And a close-up of what I hope is not, if not original, a very early window. And I think that's pretty much all I have. Anything after that one? No. So, briefly, that's the history of the site. And I'll be happy to answer any questions later when it's question time. But now we're going to turn it over to Patrick.
To Amy.
To Amy, I'm sorry.
So we talked a little bit about the history, and Amy's going to talk a little bit about some of the environmental elements that are on the site from the previous industrial uses and the DOT use.
So, as I was introduced, my name is Amy Valancourt, and I am a licensed environmental professional with the state and a brownfield specialist, 16 years experience. So, I was sort of charged or tasked with reviewing the available environmental reports that were done for DOT. The fact sheet that I prepared, it's obvious that the DOT environmental consultant didn't interview Elizabeth about the dates, and the dates are a little off possibly. 1866 is what they had for Scoville's construction of the buildings, and then in 1941 DOT took it over. Now, with regard to the environmental investigations that were done on the site, they were initially prompted because of the groundwater contamination that is identified in the center of town, in the village center, and a lot of the potable wells in the area that have been contaminated. So investigations started on this property for solvents. Trichloroethylene was the big one. There were also detections of pesticides, dieldrin, in some of the wells. So DOT was forced, with a lot of the other industrial properties in the village center, to start investigating their properties to find the source of this contamination. So DOT, the first report I reviewed was from Metcalf and Eddy, and they came out and they did potable well sampling. Second report was from DTC. They came out and they did sampling actually on the site for soil and groundwater. What they were able to determine through two rounds of investigation, 2005 and 2007, is that this property doesn't appear to be the source of the trichloroethylene or the dieldrin found in the potable wells. But they did find other issues with this property. So starting with the pond that was on the west side of the property was filled in by DOT. The exact nature of the fill material is not really known, but it's been reported that there were drums of herbicides, 4 leaking drums of herbicides put in there. They had done some test pitting. They had taken some samples. They actually didn't get any herbicides. But they did find pesticides, not dieldrin, but a different kind. What they claim on the pesticide issue is that pesticides are pretty much ubiquitous throughout the area because of agriculture use and spraying of industrial buildings. So you can find the pesticides that are on this facility and a lot of other facilities. It was DDT, DDE, so you'll see in some of the mapping and in the fact sheet that I prepared that there are pesticides that are an issue for that property, but they don't appear to be a significant or overwhelming issue to be dealt with. More so the tanks. Over the history of the property, there were 8 underground storage tanks, and they were removed by 1989, but then they put in 5 new tanks in 1989. And the tanks contained heating oil, waste oil, and gasoline and diesel. There was even reports of kerosene. Now, releases from those tanks over the history of the property and associated with dispensing the gasoline from the pumps, there have been releases, and they have been documented on the property. Some of the other issues that they did find with this property related to heavy metals. And of course, when you have a foundry and you're dealing with metals, back in history, it was custom to dump outside the property. It was a foundry, they had a forge, they have a smokestack, so they must have had ash at one time, and it was probably disposed on the property, and that's why heavy metals is a concern for that site. They have detected lead. Lead is a problem for the site and along the bank of the river. Also, DOT had reported that there was some disposal of a sealant along the banks of the river during their occupancy at the site. So that came up as another issue where they did detect some contamination related to that. All in all, yes, I'm going to tell you there's some issues to deal with for the site. It needs additional investigation. The full extent of the contamination is not known. DTC, who worked for DOT, came up with preliminary release areas where they detected some contaminants. They tried to delineate that to come up with a map about what they think needs to be excavated with regard to soil. Now, there's been some groundwater impacts detected on this property, but not enough data is known to really put a price tag on it. From what I look at the data and what was found, it's not something insurmountable for this property. There's funding available for exactly this type of reuse and historic preservation. I would encourage looking for brownfields funds. I think because the state is a responsible party for the contamination, the state might be willing to entertain, providing the town with some brownfields funds. I'm currently working on a project where DOT was responsible for the contamination, and DECD is awarding a brownfields grant to do the cleanup. So I do encourage that. I understand, there's going to be a partnership between the town and DOT, working through the details of how to acquire this property, but I do have some recommendations. When DOT leaves that site, there'll no longer be a need for using the underground storage tanks. So if you can request from them when they leave, before they leave, to take those out, that's one less thing you folks have to deal with. Liability protections for you. Connecticut has really been on the forefront of establishing liability protection for municipalities to take control of properties like this. and turn them back to productive reuse. So they have liability protections you can apply for prior to purchasing the property. You know, I don't know the sequencing or the time frame for this, but I have worked with municipalities to get liability protection, apply for funds, and do it before purchasing the property. As part of the purchase and sale agreement, we're going to apply for these, and if awarded, we'll go forward with the purchase. A couple of sort of housekeeping things from a regulatory standpoint. DOT right now is listed on paper as a responsible party. They have filed forms with the state of Connecticut saying that they're responsible for the contamination and the cleanup. When you enter into the title, you too are going to have to file forms with DEP, and somebody, the town or DOT, has to maintain responsibility for cleaning up the property. And so I've never seen a situation where DOT hands over a property and keeps the responsibility for cleaning up the contamination. So you'll have to be prepared to make that agreement with DEP, but if you have the funding in place and you have the liability protection, and when I say liability protection, there's a mechanism where you go in and clean up the site, and anything that has gone off the site is not your problem. As long as you clean up the source on your site, DEP will take care of the rest for you. And so it's part of a Section 17 liability program that is 2 years old with the state. So I would encourage that very much. I've been involved in so many of these projects, and you talked about Remington. I've done more Remington facilities than I care to explain, but this project is doable. It's a beautiful property. You have so much around it from your natural resource, your town center. I was saying, even though I live in Middletown, we have our own farmers market. I'm going to tell you, I'd come down here to yours. And I would love to see, you know, that transferred, especially all season long in a building like this, or, you know, little arts and crafts, something like that. I do see the vision of the group. So part of the reason why I'm here, part of the reason why I give up my time to put the fact sheets together and try to encourage people. I'm so happy to see the turnout, and I really hope that you back this project, because it is doable and it needs to be done. It really does.
Thank you, Amy. Next, we'll hear from Dr. Patrick Cannell.
Let's first and wait and see if the technical, yes. Let me tell you just a little bit about what I'm going to tell you. As Liz said, I've had a very checkered career, kind of meandering back and forth along the boundary line between architecture and planning, and writing and teaching. It has been very interesting to see the way that certain characteristics of towns have, over the course of the last 2 or 3 decades, really started to become respected again. Walkability now, the idea that you can walk to a variety of different places, get a variety of different services, see a variety of different people, was people would look at you in complete stupefaction if you talked about that. You know, when I was first starting to do walkable mixed income communities back in the early 1980s. Now, I'm happy to say that as a result of just that general trend line, and as a result of demographics, villages and small towns and genuine neighborhoods within cities are the future. Just one nerd fact, I've got a lot of them. 2014 is the year in which the largest number of baby boomers is alive and the highest number of millennials alive. The reason that that's significant, especially for the millennials, is in that 20 to 30 age range, 25 to 35, that's when you decide where you're going to be for the next 20 years of your life. The age, around about 60 or so, everybody's deciding where am I going to be for the rest of my life. If things are done right, there's a kind of double tide that's working in favor of old mill complexes on old water courses near beautiful old rivers in what I'm going to do, I told Lynn that I would just run quickly over some comparisons with some of the mill projects that I'm involved with right now in other corners of Connecticut.
Can you speak up a hair?
Sure. Sorry, I'm a soft-spoken Minnesotan, and I need to, I'll pipe up a bit, so Marge, yell if you can hear. That was just going to sleep. So just hit the return button, and it'll come back. Just to orient you, Saybrook Road, here's the Rossi complex. By the way, around. Yep. Let me get oriented. Here's the. Here are the two mill buildings in question. We're flying above the Connecticut River. Next, please. My fundamental point is it's not a simple problem, it's not a complicated problem, but we will not find the right answers if we isolate variables on this. You've got to look at this as a really interesting complex of variables that's more than just the outline of the property and more than just the summary sheet on the GIS site. Next, please. And more than just the property lines around. The whole kind of aquarium, as it were, all of the different kinds of organisms living within this area have to be looked at together in order to come up with a successful solution for what those two buildings and the areas around will do. Next, please. So, just to repeat, think about what I'm going to do right now is basically talk about game boards. You have to think about what these two things, what will happen to them, is really being two pieces on the general game board of the area where the three brooks converge in the center of town. Next, please. Lisa already showed this, but it's particularly good to understand the architectural history, which Lisa's really done nicely on the mill buildings, and the general history of the town. My wife and I moved here in 2001 into a 1799 house and have been dealing with the consequences ever since. But it's terrific. And seeing Lisa's little photographs reminded me of something to say to people about what we can and can't see now. Since the end of a lot of agriculture in this state, say approximately around the Second World War, two things have happened, both of which hurt our ability to understand where we are. Number one is the trees have grown up. If you look at that 1881 lithograph of Higganum, you can see the shape of the land from it. No longer can you really, with all the trees, Connecticut has more forest cover than it did when the English colonists came in. You can't see the shape of the land anymore, and therefore you can't really understand the integration of the water power and the topography and the buildings that's underneath there still. Second, with the interstate highway system and limited access roads like Route 9, where you have to do nothing more than kind of vaguely steer and push down your right foot in order to understand, and in order to get places, we don't have the kind of kinesthetic or physiological feel for where we are that we did when you walked everywhere. Next, please. So it's important to understand what our own time's blindnesses are. As Liz said, I did the 17 new actor housing cottages, which were inserted in the National Register level historic district in East Haddam. Next, please. That was really an exercise in doing what I'm just advocating be done for the two Scovil buildings, which is understand the game board of East Haddam. What we really had to do in order to site the 17 cottages over there, which are the things in yellow, was consider the whole kind of metabolism of downtown East Haddam, starting with the Goodspeed and the Gelston, and then going up to the kind of throat of the valley where Sucker Brook comes down. Right past, I will note, two rather nicely recycled old mill buildings. The library and the rehearsal studio are remnants of East Haddam's industrial heritage. And obviously, economics has to play into this. The Goodspeed was doing calculations about their payments in lieu of taxes and putting the old houses that they own back on the market so that they can be returned to the tax rolls. I'm not saying that is relevant to the Scovil buildings, but it should be part of the background calculations. Next, please. Now, the single most important move that the Goodspeed made is this little thing right here. That's the packaged sewage treatment plant, with which all of the actor housing cottages and all of the center of East Haddam is running on that, and it's not even running to capacity now. People look at that and they think, it's a dumpster right outside the kitchens of the Gelston house. It's not. That's what handles. A friend of mine says that all planning problems basically boil down to poop and parking. There's some truth to that. So, next, please. Chester has the same thing. Have you ever wondered what that funny little sacred grove of trees is down at the end of the parking lot? That's their packaged sewage treatment plant. It's right behind the Patacom's kitchen. So if you've had a Patacom burger, you've been pre-tested over whether those things are odoriferous or not. Next, please. One of the mill buildings, or set of complexes that I'm working on right now, was the last operating woolen mill in Connecticut, up in Stafford Springs. The current owners are an Italian outfit called Loro Piana, make very high-end fabrics. They've determined, sadly, that they can no longer economically make high-end fabrics in this country, so they're looking for new uses for the upper and lower mill complexes here. And I'm going to trot out some of the things that we're talking about here, just because it's the right time to be thinking big. What do we want to do here? What do we want at the center of town? We probably won't get it, but it never hurts to kind of look around and look at the possibilities. Stafford Springs is in a very interesting location. It's basically 13 miles down to Yukon and 12 miles north to UMass. So there's a kind of educational axis, which interestingly is connected by a live rail line. There is, running along 84, there's a major natural gas pipeline which is coming north into the center of town now. There are going to be 800,000 square feet of vacant mill space. What kinds of stuff can be done when you've got a large number of educational brains and students, pocketbooks, a rail line? Well, one of the things that we're looking at as a potential model is what the state of Maine very smartly did with its stimulus money. Instead of widening highways all over the place, which is what Connecticut did, they did something called the three-ring binder, which was to connect all of the institutions of higher education throughout the state of Maine with dark fiber. So they're now starting to attract basically cloud computing companies to some of the old mill buildings in Connecticut. They're powered by very highly incrementally buildable natural gas-fired, highly efficient electric turbines. So there are a number of places that are contemplating generating high-quality power with the gas turbines fed by, and basically feeding the brain power of Maine. That kind of thing might well be what could fly in Stafford Springs now. Next, please. Right now I'm working on a project which has been on hold courtesy of the recession for about 3 years. This is Collinsville, Connecticut. If you haven't been up there, make a visit. It's a very cool town. It's an old grid of a downtown right on the Farmington River. The Collinsville Axe Factory is a kind of museum west of different, it's the history of New England mill building types, starting in 1826 through to the last one of the complex was constructed in the 1960s. Interestingly enough, since the guy who owns them now has not been able to afford to keep them up since he bought the complex in 2000, they've been deteriorating, and maybe not so curiously, the oldest buildings are in the best shape. The newest, the steel buildings down at the south end, are in awful shape and have had a fire that are in all probability going to be the site of a tear down. Next, please. Just a little close up. Here's the yard, the dam. How many of you know this? Good, good. Set of old canals running through. Oh, and the Farmington, what was originally the Farmington Canal from New Haven up to Northampton, Mass., which is now a rails to trails line for most of its length, runs right through. Kind of nifty little downtown with a green, the Congo Church, the south side of it. Next, please. There are many technical issues that have to be done as background, not only environmental issues, but believe it or not, even if you're up from a creek bed, you've got to watch the flood lines, because Connecticut, here's, you can't quite see it here, but a bunch of this site, there's the dam that I was just showing you, the town is here. Connecticut has a peculiarly bureaucratic mindset about the territory between the 100-year and 500-year flood lines. So they, it's another nerd thing to beware of, but, and I haven't even looked, Liz, I don't know if that applies over here, but what you can do might well be affected by a bureaucratic interpretation of the federal statutes on what's buildable in that in-between zone. Next, please. What's happening in Collinsville is dependent on that, which is the sewage treatment plant. They have one. They were smart enough to put one in, and that's one of the reasons that the town, even though the mill was closed in 1966, the town is a kind of interesting, artsy, blue-collar mix. It's exactly the kind of interesting, walkable, quirky place that one wants to see. Not a homogenized village, but something where you can be surprised and interested. Next, please. There are 2 dams. Here's the one Bridge Street goes past. This one is actually down in Farmington, but next, please. The one of my other clients who I'm getting involved with this is an outfit. This is where it's fascinating to see the way that old and new stuff can get together again. All these old mills typically were, for obvious reasons, adjacent to water. Well, gee, can we take some advantage of that again? there are people who are really looking at opportunities for low-head hydropower around. And gee, if you went down to Higganum Cove last week when all the water was running off, we could have beat up the dam. But this particular outfit is called New England Hydropower, and they are importing Dutch and Scottish low-head hydro equipment. The interesting thing about that is not only do you not need a big Hoover Dam to run one of these things and generate power, but they're fish friendly. The Scots love their fly fishing, so they've come up with a generator technology that uses Archimedes screws. So not only can the fish slide down if they're going downstream, but if they're trying to migrate upstream, you can reverse the flow and make a kind of fish escalator up and upstream. These folks are very interested in Collinsville, and interestingly enough, they have Higganum Center already on their matrix of sites to investigate. So if we can get a kind of cool quotient, the way that Collinsville has a cool quotient, they're looking for kind of poster child products for the projects that they can do installations and get a lot of good PR out of them. If we can up our cool quotient, then we might be able to, here's a hypothetical, attract some light industry that wants to be able to get electricity at 2 cents a kilowatt hour cheaper than you can get it from the grid. I don't know whether these buildings have that potential, but it's something, we're at the stage right now where we should be thinking about all those kinds of different variables combining. Next, please. Just an overall shot of the plan for the Collinsville Ice Factory. We're going to do adaptive reuse of the older buildings. This is where the steel set of buildings are that are deteriorated right now. What we'll, in all likelihood, be doing is continuing this kind of town green concept so that you'll be able to see from the back of the Congregational Church straight down the Farmington River. Great view. And of course, next please, what we're doing is plugging in different, I did a plan that has street and block sizes such that it's really, to continue my metaphor, it's a game board. As we track the markets, we can track what kinds of housing should plug into the things. And let me make this point. Housing always leads. It leads retail, it leads offices. So if you're trying to bring a place back, for crying out loud, New Haven even, once they got the 5,000 or so people that are now living in downtown there, or even New Haven's become a restaurant destination. People commute up from Fairfield County to go to restaurants in New Haven. We should be thinking about the housing in the vicinity of the village center precisely because you seed everything else. When you've got people able to walk to places and enjoy them and spend their money. Next, please. Just a little scale comparison. Here's Collinsville, here we are. So I won't take the time to unpack it here now, but there are, of course, as you might think, fascinating parallels in basic structure between the center of Higganum. Here's our cemetery, here's their cemetery. You've got to consider history. There's really a kind of separated at birth quality to the old mill villages of the state. And we, I think, can profit from looking at not only the uniqueness of Higganum Center, but about its commonalities with its brothers and sisters under the skin, like up in the northwest corner of Connecticut. Next, please. So here we are back to what we're talking about tonight. Next, please. That is it. So it's a terrible death to be talked to death, as Mark Twain said, so I won't do that to you.
Thank you, Patrick. And last, and certainly not least, we have Wes Haynes from the Connecticut Historic Trust here to talk a little bit about potential programs and his experience.
Sure. So, in case you don't know who the Connecticut Trust for Historic Preservation is, we are the statewide not-for-profit historic preservation organization. We're not the state agency that regulates historic preservation, which is the State Historic Preservation Office, but we're their statutory partner. So we're the private sector side of the state. And we are very fortunate to be in that position because we act as the agent for the State Historic Preservation Office in terms of getting money out onto the street a little bit quicker than they're able to because of their state agency. And we can do it with a little bit less red tape. And we have a good trusting relationship that hasn't gone south in the 30-year history of the Connecticut Trust. I'm very new on the staff, so I've only been there since last July. But I was very lucky because I was hired to do what was my life's ambition, which was to develop a program that was centered around Connecticut's industrial heritage and the preservation. The State Historic Preservation Office is embedded within the Department of Economic and Community Development. They're one of a number of different agencies that are collected there. And they have access to the Community Investment Act funding, which one of the priorities is historic preservation. And because DECD is taking a global look now at the fact that we are at a point, the Industrial Revolution, the industrial period in Connecticut is more or less over. I think people are willing to acknowledge that. If manufacturing comes back, it's going to come back in a much different form than most of the built environment that's associated with it is going to represent. And we have to really start thinking seriously about adaptive use of many of the state's industrial buildings. And as was pointed out tonight, there are certain environmental problems with adapting industrial sites. There are planning problems that are there, but they're not insurmountable. And there are many, many good examples of conversions that are going on right now. For example, if any of you are members of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, you get the Historic Preservation magazine. The cover feature this month is an industrial building in Baltimore that was converted to a school. Schools, or public schools, have the most rigorous environmental standards of any building type around. And this was a brownfield site that is now operating as a public school. So to come from a brownfield point to a public school is an incredible journey for a building. And it just demonstrates, I think, that anything is possible with these buildings. I was very excited when I was introduced by Liz to these buildings a couple of months ago. I guess it was 6 months ago. Unfortunately, we weren't able to fund the project then because there wasn't established site control on the building. But I got very excited about the potential of these two buildings in particular. You're very lucky that you are acquiring them at the same time that we now have money to do something with them. And DECD has an ombudsman by the name of Tim Sullivan within DECD that is sort of an agency air traffic control to make sure that DEEP and their environmental outfit is in coordination with DECD's economic development money and also the SHPO's money for historic preservation. So there's a real core there in the state right now that wants to get something done with this. So the fact that you're acquiring them this time means that there's a lot of opportunity for state funding for any issues that are going on environmentally from our end in terms of developing the program, or just even, we are giving out money to apply for other grant applications for environmental cleanup that aren't normally funded by the agencies. We're funding EPA money, EPA grant applications right now. So we have some money there. In terms of just beyond our money, There's money for restoration, if that's a course you want to go with. The State Historic Preservation Office has historic restoration grant funding, up to $200,000. That's a one-to-one match. The municipality or a nonprofit could receive that money for the project. They also have planning money as well available to prepare the construction documents for the restoration. So there's a lot of opportunity there that you can tap into resources at the state level. One of the parts of what we're doing right now is compiling, for the first time in 35 years, is a statewide inventory of historic resources. We've identified 3,200 industrial sites around the state that are potentially above-ground resources that are historically significant. And the Scovil Hoe plant is definitely on that list, and is one of probably the easiest and most accommodating and most graceful buildings to convert just from an architectural point of view. You're very lucky because DOT basically carved the building up into a number of bays. This is really quite fortunate for you because it opens up the menu of options you have for that building. You can do a preservation project there, which means that basically you kind of deal with the building as it is. And if your program works within that bay kind of division for the garage bays, those could be small shops or live workspace for artists or a number of things. I mean, even one of those bays could be reserved for a small museum that talks about industry. And the hottest museum type right now in the United States is museums of conscience. And the association of the hoes with slavery in this place could make you a global destination, just like the Tenement Museum is in New York City. It talks about an important aspect of American history that people want to see. They're tired of seeing beautifully restored colonial houses that celebrate a very limited vision of American history. They want to see more of the big picture. So you had part of that big picture right there. I'm not pushing a museum, but I'm just saying that that's an opportunity. Forges adapt very well as restaurants. They're very cool. If you've been to Billings Forge in Hartford to have dinner or lunch, it's a really great place. It's a great space to have dinner in. You have those wonderful monitor roofs on the buildings that could allow in a lot of borrowed light from the top that could be restored. They've been pretty much closed. When we went through the buildings, they were closed off by ceilings that could be taken out very easily. So there's a lot of opportunity there. They're really flexible. If you wanted to restore them and put back the bay division, there's money for that. But I wouldn't jump to that solution right away. I think I'd try to keep them flexible because I think they're much more adaptable that way. So I guess that's pretty much my basic pitch. And certainly I'll talk to anybody individually with questions afterwards, but I'll jump into the question and answers.
Thank you. Thanks, Rod. I'm going to open it up for questions, but before I do, I just wanted to recognize our first selectman, Melissa Schlage, who's here, and I understand you might have some additional information to contribute. And then we'll open it up for questions for a few minutes for that.
I want to thank you guys all for coming and Liz for moderating and Vision Group for setting this up because this is what our town needs. I don't think there's really been a true plan that's been put in place for the past, I don't know how long. But I do think that we need to look at 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years down the road. And Liz and I just talked today about POCD work that we'll be doing in the next 3 years. I think we do need to figure out what we want to be. I don't want to get philosophical, but of course, as the one who signs the checks every day, I see what we get in and what we spend. I really did a diligent job this year cleaning up the budget, and that's my goal, is to go after the money that we're owed by the state, go after grant funds, keep our spending low so we can do these fun things. So I hope everybody can be a part of that as well. The news I have from DOT, because I was able to get a hold of them today, is they will quit claim the property to us. It's the good news. I was worried that their first message to me was cryptic. I didn't know if they were going to ask for money for it. But they said it will be free, however, they will not clean it up, of course. So we'll have to do that, and we will definitely look into the liability issue. So that's pretty much it, but I do have a lot of things that I'm going to be working on, and I look forward to actually seeing something happen with these buildings, because they are really special, and I'm excited to help you guys. So thank you.
Thanks for the update. All right, so we have 15 or 20 minutes or so to take questions from the floor. I see the gentleman with his hand up in the back.
Hi, just real quick. About a year and a half ago, there was a presentation here by Andrew Becker, who was talking about doing work on the Rocky plant. And you were talking about pieces of a puzzle. I mean, there's the other piece, more residential or whatever in there, tied in with this, seems to make sense where you expand the downtown area into a real downtown. Having a business here in town, I know that I'm one of only a couple that are here. It'd be nice to be able to have a center that we could really say, this is our town center, it's based around the green, we have residential here, we have whatever going on up here. Has any talk been done with the economic group on what's happening with Andrew Becker? Is that still happening? Is that dead? That's kind of the question.
Okay. Yeah, Andrew Becker is here, so rather than
I'll just answer you quickly. Yes, indeed, we're continuing with our plans. We're kind of going through some of these same mill building issues, but I think we've gotten to the end of it, and we're in a position fairly soon where we'll start doing the designs and the drawings necessary for submissions at the town level. So we're still continuing, and if you remember, our plan was 85 units of housing and some 25,000 square feet of commercial office or retail space. So you spoke about housing, and there's a housing component in our mind, at least for the village.
If I can just piggyback on that, the Planning and Zoning Commission got an incentive housing zone grant, and we're going to be putting out a request for a qualification soon to do some kind of mixed income, higher density housing. And one of the logical areas for that would be the Higganum area, with the idea that if you put feet on the street, you put bodies here, that the business will follow. And there definitely is a need for smaller housing types at a diversity of affordability. For people who are entering into, for workforce housing, or for seniors who are empty nesters who want to downsize. So that's something else that we're looking at with the Planning and Zoning Commission.
May I just say one physical or one planning aspect of this? The housing in relationship to other development works best if you bracket the place that you're developing. So where Andy's doing stuff is exactly the right thing to do, to bracket. Collinsville, the new housing that they've got at the south end of the site will, with the existing housing in the downtown, just bracket the old mill buildings. And that's the best formula for actually making it work.
I'll just add a quick little piece to that too. Under the Brownfields state program, those who have received grants for incentive housing and who are doing incentive housing zones get priority on Brownfields grants.
I didn't know that. That's good to know.
And one other thing I'll add, there's exemptions for redevelopment of mill buildings and floodplains if you use Brownfield funding.
Beth?
I'm having a little trouble wrapping my head around the ownership of it. Are we going to take it and clean it up and offer it to a developer, or are we going to attempt to become landlords?
That remains to be seen. In most situations, what would happen is the town would take ownership of it, clean it, or receive grants to get it cleaned up, and then use that, for example, one option might be use that to attract a developer to do the type of development that the community wants to see. So it wouldn't just be like selling the property back. It would be saying, using it as an incentive, if you develop it with this type of development, we will either give it to you or give it to you at a reduced price or whatever.
And who's talking about the poop project? Because I don't hear that going on, and that obviously has to go on.
That,
I mean, we've talked about that ad nauseum for 10 years.
yes, there's certainly an interest and a need for sewers in this area, and there's,
I can talk a little bit about
okay.
that, because I know where you're going with this. Again, they have like a laundry list of things that need to be done in town, and I know that this is hard to hear, but it's not always just about Higganum. We do have water problems in Tylerville. So I actually wrote down a list of things because I figured it would come up. I think this is part of what I'm getting at with the 5, 10, 15, 20-year plan. I think we do need to plan for what we want to do. And I know that there's a lot of great, really intelligent, smart people in here that have been working for years, like on the sewers for Higganum. And I know that it's a really tough issue in the water in Tylerville. One of the first things I think we do need to do is deal with our town garage that's in the middle of our village. Obviously, it's too small. Andy's going to kick us out in 2 years. We're using the, maybe. We're using one of their buildings to keep all our trucks and equipment in there. And there's a rent attached to that. If we find another location for our town garage, we get out of there, we have the money we save, we put into our own town garage on another site. There's one site that I have in mind. Once we get that out, which is a price tag of $3 million, then we can think about what to do with a sewer system like the Chester or the Deep River or the East Haddam model, something a little smaller. Obviously, the sewers from Middletown, it's not going to happen. But we do have the water in Tylerville that we have to worry about. All of those properties there are contaminated. We do have some road projects that, we have a lot of deferred maintenance in town that nothing's been done for quite a few years. We're really starting to get going on. And then the cleanup, obviously, of the Scovil site. We have 2 big bridge projects coming up in the next 2 to 3 years. One federal bridge project, which is going to be exciting. Over here in Depot Road, the old bridge will be used for pedestrians. They're going to build a new bridge to kind of straighten out the road. So that will kind of incorporate part of the cove into our whole plan, walkability, and maybe something to do with your plan, the water, and who knows. I think the cool factor, as you mentioned, is part of it. And I think we do need to plan for, and maybe this is something the Vision Group and EDC and the Planning and Zoning Commission can all get together, kind of like the Higganum Master Plan Group, and really figure out what we need to do in all parts of our town and choose one, and then go after that. Again, we're underfunded with our education cost sharing grant, which I did meet with Malloy last week. We're $2 million a year, every year, underfunded compared to all the towns around us. $2 million, you would have all these projects, and they'd be done. So if we continue to pursue that and really attack our legislators and the governor to get that money, we can do all these cool things. So I'm really going to push for that, and I hope if I can ever ask you guys to write letters to say, listen guys, we need to move our town forward. We can create jobs, we can create tax money rolling into the state, and it's all part of a big plan. So I do hope that in the future we will have sewers. And it is something that we do need, and we are, I think I read somewhere, we're the largest landmass town without city water or sewers. So that's something that we do need to recognize we have that issue. But again, there's all these other laundry list of chores that we have to do at the same time. Almost everything seems to need to be done at the same time. So I think I do look forward to more discussion on setting up a real concrete plan, and then also still attacking our state for the money. So that's kind of part of the sewer discussion. So, thank you guys.
Andy?
I just wanted to ask quickly, do we know anything about the structural condition of those buildings?
As far as I know, they have their integrity, and they're in good shape.
They're brick bearing wall buildings, which is a relatively stable type.
If I
I could, I'd like to just share one experience to this lady's comment about becoming the landlord of the property. One of my famous brownfields is Remington Rand in Middletown, which the city owns. They generate a rent and a profit every year out of that facility. That money goes into the economic development and it perpetually funds other projects throughout the city. They do plan on turning the property over to a developer, but right now it's going strong, paying for itself. It also paid for the cleanup of the property. So there's something to be said about that.
Other questions or concerns or points? Yes?
I guess this question would be either to you or to Melissa. If the town decides not to move forward on these buildings here, what does the state then do with them when they vacate?
So if the town were to not
Take a pass on it.
take a pass on it,
Yeah.
I assume that the state would then sell them or auction them. I'm not sure, so there's a bill that requires the state to offer it to the town first, so we get right of first refusal. I do not know if anyone gets right of second refusal, but I believe it would then go to auction.
I think there's a couple layers when it's a state property. I think they have to offer it to other state agencies first, and then to, there's like levels before it just goes to auction, like a sign out front kind of auction. And then other people get to say no thanks to first.
Other questions or comments? Yes?
Has there been any discussion, I really don't know, so of moving the state or the town garage into these buildings?
I think that if that were to happen, that it would be on a very temporary basis. The first selectman just mentioned about the idea of moving the town garage out of the village district. So it's possible that there might be some equipment storage there that would happen on a very temporary basis while construction might be happening elsewhere for a town
But
garage.
there's no plans to permanently move?
No. And I think I would argue, and I think most of the panel would concur, we don't want our town garage in our village district.
Good.
We would like to repurpose that building for something, to be a draw to, tourism, economic development, community oriented.
I'll remind everybody that for a while, DOT used the Goodspeed Opera. So you can't always rely on the preservationist instincts.
Can I add one more? To Patrick, I'm very intrigued by these septic systems that you're putting into Collinsville and
The Collinsville one was already there.
is that anything viable for the center of our town?
I would not see why not.
I mean, is it fit financially, physically possible?
The Economic Development Commission has done a little report on the costs and operating costs, and is Steve here?
You mean Mike
Mike
Fortuna? Yes.
Oh, there he is. Do you want to talk about that, Mike? Or?
Yeah, the system that was actually proposed or recommended by EDC is very similar to one in East Haddam. It's a little bit smaller, but that same black box approach, where it's treatment and discharge to the river to pick up the village, which is essentially from the Scovil properties down to the center, out 81 to the bridge to pick up the plaza, and then to the property by the retaining walls. So that system has been conceptualized by Wright Pierce Engineering out of Middletown. There's been a capital cost and an operating and maintenance cost associated with it published. We looked at 5 different options. 3 black box approaches, then a connection to Middletown up 154, and another option was a connection to Middletown up the railroad tracks, hooking up to Pratt & Whitney's pump station. And what we ultimately recommended was a black box treatment center in Higganum. Similar to Chester, similar to East Haddam, a little different than Collinsville. That's more of a treatment facility at a larger scale, but same approach.
You had your hand up.
Yeah, I just was wondering, sort of what you were saying, if there's a compromise in there somewhere, I don't know all the dynamics of the situation, but why wouldn't we consider something like moving the garages to these buildings that are beautiful buildings, but fund the treatment facility or whatever black box solution so that we can then develop the Rossi property, I don't know what's going to support that property, and then knowing that we can then continue to get grants or funds down the road for the preservation of these buildings and work out the options for the garage as a later solution.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's just, I don't know if anybody's considering other alternatives other than just restoring this immediately.
Can I speak to that?
Sure.
Hopefully I'm not dating myself too much, but this conversation started in the early 80s. Because that's when talk began of closing this particular garage, believe it or not. And DEP at the time kind of had a logical reason for not moving the town garage over to Candlewood Hill, is why would they agree to move this type of operation from one portion of a brook to an upstream portion of a brook? There wasn't the logic, because town garages have a potential for pollution, large sand and salt supplies, fuel, and the whole idea of moving a garage is really get it away from the water courses.
Yeah, I can see that. It's near one now, though, right?
Yeah, it's right on
And it's
it.
been 20 years since that discussion began.
It's been over 30.
30 years.
Yeah.
So to me, it seems the issue might be more about the black box or whatever solution you can get the businesses in. And then work on, so I don't know, that's just from what I've heard, and I'm just entering these discussions. I've not been around a lot of these conversations.
The other thing is, over all these decades, it's been my belief that the town of, the people, the citizens of Haddam expect to acquire this property and have in their minds for a long time that it's something that the town should take over at some point, not necessarily for a town garage, but for the health of our town. I've never heard any strong opposition to it, which I think is a plus, because it's been talked about for a long time.
I see.
Okay, we're going to start to wrap up, but I see two more hands, and then we'll, I'm going to hand the reins back over to Lynn. So Liz?
I just wanted to make a quick comment in terms, if people are interested in seeing adaptive reuse of mills that are done on a very minimal kind of way. The Velvet Mill in Stonington is just incredible. Their farmers market, which is a really cool farmers market, goes in there in the winter, or I think this is the first winter they're in there, I'm not sure. But there's just a big open space and music playing, and I went there one of the last really cold days. The place was packed with people, but the restoration isn't like high end, it's very, very rough. There's artists in there, there's a bakery in there, there's a brewery, I think, in there. But again, they have this big space, and they just set tables up in it, and people hanging out. It's as big as our green almost, but just hanging out, and a huge amount of people. I came from Middletown to it. And also, a little closer to home, I've been doing a meditation group in Middletown in the building off of, you might know the name of it, the building off of Washington Street. Harriet Mandy Chapman is in it, the shop, but there's yoga studios, hairdressers. I don't know the name of the building.
It's on Boston Road, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's, again, another one where it's very rough, the owners probably did the minimal to bring it up to code, and
My friend is an owner, he's a...
Vinci owns it, I think.
Yeah.
But something like that seems like for a minimal investment, they get a lot of people in there, a lot of things going on, and really varied things. The Velvet Mill also had one little area of this very, very large mill, much bigger than this, where all psychiatrists' office in one area there. So it really was a varied kind of use. Interesting to see.
Yeah.
So I encourage everyone to go to Stonington and check out the Velvet Mill.
one last question.
Yeah, Liz, I was just going to say, even if moving the town garage to the current Scoville site was something in mind, I think the fact that we heard that there were so many incentives that really, you know, we're hearing from Wes and Amy about all of these incentives and these dollars that are available. And I was just hoping that after this meeting too, are we still going to be able to tap into Amy where she had some, you know, oh, by the way, if you do this, that, or the other, it just, and not that I was opposed to that, but it helps us here as, you know, the townsfolk, so to speak, not knowing what the professional panel knows about dollars available and incentives. I think it might help guide us as to what that use would be.
I will comment. I'll deter you right now from putting your town garage at that property, because then you can be a cause or a contribution to that contamination. You will not be eligible for funds.
And I'll also second that too, that we would not fund putting the garage back or give any planning money for that. And the Community Investment Act, although it's there right now, Senator Williams, who is its sponsor, is retiring. And so we don't really know if that money is going to be there in 2 years. So I'd say that strike while the iron is hot right now from the preservation side.
I'll just add to that, knowing Haddam, if we moved our town garage to these buildings, it would never leave.
Well, I want to thank everyone, and especially our panelists who put so much time into doing some research. I'm going to turn the program back over to Lynn Cooper.
Before you leave, please grab a flyer. Nancy Myers is handing out a little simple questionnaire. So if you didn't get a chance to ask a question or make a comment or a suggestion, please use these papers. Just check off some of the ideas that we have heard from you guys are all noted, note them down. There's a rating system. And any comments or ideas like the one Tim had, maybe there are things we're not thinking about. So please grab one and let us know what you think.
We have pencils coming your way too. There's comments.
Nancy has pencil. Similar to Lisa, I'm going to just go on May 17th. We have our annual progressive dinner, the Higganum Vision Group progressive dinner. If you're interested, talk to Susan Sola. It's a lot of fun. Houses are filling up, and people really enjoy it. Thank you, Wes. Thank you, Patrick. Lisa. Thanks, Amy. And most thank you, Liz Glidden. And Melissa, thank you for everything you do. Keep in touch. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.